Thank you for this opportunity for us to come together and share the word once again. Today's subject is dealing with the omnipotence of God, meaning that He's all-powerful. He's His attribute of infinite power over all things. As we look at the attributes of God, we begin with omniscient, meaning He's all-knowing. And then last week we looked at omnipresent, meaning all-present. And I think it's important that we build on these, because just because somebody knows something and somebody's there doesn't mean they have the ability to do anything about it. And that's why it's important to understand this attribute of God about omnipotent, because God knows what's going to happen. He's with you, and He now has the power that we're going to look at today. Has the power to be able to do anything He needs to do. And that's the question we're looking at as we're looking at omnipotent. It's very important that we understand these attributes, and they belong only to God, because God's the only one that is all-knowing and all-present and all-powerful. These are only reference to Him. No angels or demons or no humans, no other person have these only attributes to God. This is very important. And tonight's text, we're looking at Jeremiah 32, verse 27. Let's listen to what it says here, the prophet. It says, "Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me?" That's the question we're asking. Is there anything too hard for God? Is God able? That's the question of our text tonight that we're talking about. Is God able? And that's why we're studying the omnipotence of God. As we're looking at His omnipotence, we need to ask this question. What can God do? And the question, if you ask what God can do, we could write volumes. We could never finish answering the question. So it's a lot easier to say, what cannot God do? And that's the easier question, because that's a simple answer. There's nothing there that He cannot do. He can do everything. And it's very important to know that God is unlimited. That anything He desires and wants to do, He can do. He's unlimited power. His power to do everything. It's very, very important as we understand and work out our theology on this subject here. Because you see, a lot of times what we do is we don't have our theology worked out and to know who He is, and that's why we need to build on this and understand who God is and His power. And it's very, very important as we start looking at this, as we start to ask this question about His attributes. Is there anything too hard for God? Is there anything He can't do? And we need to try our theology and build it out and question ourselves. And that's a question you need to work out for yourself. Not what I'm saying, but what do you believe and understand? Is there anything too hard for your God? That's the question you need to know, because a lot of people have little gods. He can't do much. Their gods are too small to fix problems. But the God of the Bible is the God that we're looking at here, the one and only true God. And according to the Bible, there's unlimited power. There's nothing He can't do. And that's why we need to look at this. And I broke it down to 3 different topics I'm going to look about with God's omnipotent. Is omnipotent over what? As I'm going to look at the spiritual realm, the natural realm, and man, over man. I want to look at these different avenues because I think it's very important that we understand God's ability over these areas. And the first one I want to look at is the spiritual realm. And I'm not going to read the text. As I told you before, we're only dipping our toes in the depth of theology. Please go back and study these much deeper. You can go very deep in these subjects. But if you look at Ezekiel chapter 28 or Isaiah chapter 14, you'll find the scriptures talk about Lucifer, which is the highest of the spiritual realm that we know. As he raised up himself, he was a high angel. He exalted himself above God in heaven. And God cast him out of heaven, 1/3 of the angels. He cast him out. And that's very important to realize, that God cast him out of heaven and cast him to the earth. And we know that the adversary tries to raise up here. And you'll find Revelation chapter 20, verses 7 through 10. You'll find the whole chapter 20. Actually, you'll find that God dealt with him here, where He bound him and locked him for 1,000 years. You can find time and time prior to that God defeated him on many of his events. But we find there he's bound for 1,000 years in prison. And after 1,000 years in prison, in the future, he will be then cast into eternity in hell, in Gehenna. And I think it's so very important that we understand this. We find that the highest spiritual foe that we know of, Lucifer, he's cast out of heaven. He's defeated on the earth time and time again until he's locked up in prison in an abyss for 1,000 years. And after 1,000 years, he's loose for a little bit, and then he's cast into Gehenna for all eternity. So God has totally defeated the biggest foe that we know of in the scriptures in the spiritual realm. Whereas I know you and I will never probably have to deal with Lucifer himself, because remember, he's not omniscient, he's not omnipresent. All these are one person just like we are. We'll have to deal with maybe different demonics. That Lucifer only deals with the big people. We know presidents and rulers and kings and sort of stuff. But we will still have problems with difficulties with demonic beings, but we need to understand God is over all of them. He's defeated them all. He can defeat them. There's no power in the spiritual realm that He cannot defeat. That's very, very important to understand. So God is completely over the spiritual realm, totally defeated them, and will totally keep defeating them. The next realm I want to talk about is the natural realm. I think it's important. In 2 Kings chapter 20, you'll find that Hezekiah was told that he was sick unto death by the prophet Isaiah. He told him to get his house in order, he's fixing to die. And before the prophet got out, because Hezekiah turned his face to God and cried out to God for God to heal him. And before he got out, God sent him back to give him more time, give him 15 more years of his life. So Hezekiah comes back and tells, Isaiah comes back to tell Hezekiah to make a medicine like a balm out of figs to put on his balls and he would be healed. And Hezekiah said to Isaiah, how do I know this is going to work? And he said, I'll give you a sign. And he made the sundial go back 10 degrees. And that's why I'm looking at this in nature. You'll find right here. So Hezekiah is healed by medicine, but yet to show that the medicine is going to work, God made the sundial go back 10 degrees. Now think about that for a moment. How do you make the sun to go back in a sundial 10 degrees? That's above nature, like it's uncomprehendable. We know that the sun's not moving, the earth's moving. So how do you stop it and make it go backwards 10 degrees? That's the God we serve. He can make the sundial go backwards with his miraculous ability over nature. And that's what he did to demonstrate to Hezekiah that he would be healed. And note that he healed him with medicine by making a balm out of figs, but he showed him how powerful that it would be done by making the sundial go backwards. As you begin to understand, is God over nature? Yes, he is. The next thing I want to look about that is we find in Matthew chapter 8 where the disciples were crossing the sea and Jesus was in a boat asleep, and a great storm blew up. And they got very fearful because he was sleeping, and they woke him up. But stop for a moment. Now, the disciples are fishermen, and yet here they're in a storm, and the storm comes about, and they're scared. These are seasoned fishermen that's been on the sea over and over again, and yet the storm is so bad, it's fearful for them that they wake up Jesus because he's asleep. And what does Jesus do? He tells the storm to stop, and the storm obeys. The wind stopped blowing, and the seas calm down by the word of his mouth. Now, think about that, how our God, now you talk about omnipotent, can talk to the storm and stop it. We look at the healing. He healed the body. He made the sundial go backwards. He takes and he stops the storm. We can also find when the children of Israel was coming out of Egypt, they was trapped up against the Red Sea as the Pharaoh and the army was charging after them. And what happened was God told Moses to raise up the staff, and he parted the Red Sea. And we have the children of Israel walking across on dry land as the sea is parted, and they're walking with water piled up on each side, and they're walking on dry ground across the sea. Think about that. When they got across, the Egyptians came in, he lowered his staff, the water come back and destroyed all the enemies. Think about the power that is to have the water stand back where you can walk on dry land. You can also find that they did it with the Jordan River in Joshua chapter 3, where he told them to take the Ark of the Covenant, and the Jordan River's overflooded at this time. He told them just walk, and as they carried the Ark of the Covenant, walked, as they stepped, the waters kept parting, and they walked straight across on dry ground. So once again, he shows the power over nature. He has power over these different things. He even has power over animals, because we can find when the prophet was hungry in the woods, Elijah, that the God sent ravens to feed him. You know, ravens are like a vulture, they're scavengers. They brought him food. Now think about using scavengers to bring food to feed a person. Now what is that likely? And of course we know about the foolish prophet that wouldn't listen to God. And what did he do? He made a donkey talk to stop Balaam from what he was doing. He stopped him and shut him up so he would quit doing what he's doing. And we can find over and over again how God uses nature and events. We can also find that Peter foolishly told him that he could pay the taxes to the government, which he didn't have the money. And Jesus says, we can't pay it, but go fishing. And the first fish he catch check in his mouth. And so Peter goes fishing, and the first fish he pulls out, there's a coin in his mouth enough to pay the taxes. I wish it still worked today for me, but nonetheless, that's what God is over nature. He can even do these things. And that goes back, that ties a lot of them together, because you see the omniscient and omnipotent together. He knew the fish would have it, and he knew Peter would be able to catch it and be able to pay the taxes. And you look at the awesomeness of God. You can also look at Exodus chapter 17, where he was thirsty out in the desert, in the wilderness, and God brought water out of a rock. Now think about that in the desert, bringing water out of a rock. So now we're talking about God's power, omnipotent power. We looked over the spiritual realm. Now we looked over the natural realm. God is over all of these areas. There's nothing that he's not able to do. There's no problem, no feat too big for him. The next one, we look over man. And I want to talk a tiny bit out of Daniel chapter 4. We find Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, that he started exalting himself too high, and God told him not to, but he kept doing it. So God took and made him like an animal that he went scratching the field for years. He ate grass like an ox for years to humble him. It did humble him and changed him. Now think about that. If he could take a ruler, a man that's ruling the world, and make him go out in the field and eat like an ox that scratches in the ground and eats grass for years. But then what else? The next thing we look about man is his grandson didn't learn from his grandfather. And one night, we know the story, they was celebrating and drinking into the false gods and lifting up drinks. And he told the people, go out and get the treasures that we brought from Israel over here. We're going to lift up these drinks out of these vessels. So they went and got the holy vessels of God's house that they had captive in there, and they brought back, and they started lifting up with those vessels, worshiping false gods. And you know the story. Next thing, there's a hand writing on the wall. And what happens is the prophet Daniel tells him the interpretation that he's judged this day. He's going to become dead and lose his kingdom. And that very day, that very night, the Medo-Persians came in. It was on their way, and they came in that very night and killed him and took the kingdom. So in one day, God changed the kingdoms also. So think about that. He changes kings. He changes kingdoms. God is over all things. We look at sickness throughout the Bible over and over. You can find that God's over sickness. So we have to be careful because God does sickness in different ways. Sometimes He uses medicine, as we saw from Hezekiah. He used the balm. Sometimes He uses doctors. Sometimes He brings people home. That is a healing too. Sometimes we just need to trust God in what He does, because remember, He's omniscient. He knows all, and He has a plan. So whether we talk about sickness, we need to be careful, but He's over sickness. Over death, He's over death. You know, a lot of times we think death is a bad thing. Death, He brings us home to eternity with God. But He's over death also. We showed in the Old Testament and New Testament, God has power over death because He does resurrection. So as we look at this area here about God's omnipotent, you'll find that the God that we serve is not only all-knowing, omniscient, omnipresent everywhere, but He's omnipotent. He has power over all of these areas. There's nothing that He can't do. There's not an area He has no power over. And you continue to go and dig deeper and deeper into Scriptures, and that's what I want you to know. Is there anything too hard for God to do? And that's a question you need to answer for your own self and building your theology. Try to do it now when you're not in a crisis mode. I know we're in troubled times right now with all's going on, but it'll give you comfort and peace to know who He is and know that He can do all things, that He's with you, He knows where you're going to be, and He can fix the problems that it needs to be fixed. If He doesn't do something for what you're at, He knows the answers, to trust Him in all these things. And that's what we need to learn about our God. It's so important. Is there any need that He can't meet? Is there any problem that He can't fix? Is there any difficulty that's too big for Him? That's the theology we need to work out ourselves. And during these trying times, we have time to study the Scriptures and learn more about God, and we can get peace and comfort knowing who our God is. A lot of times people don't understand faith. Faith is, like I keep telling you, studies, it's not just believing. Faith is connected. As you study the Bible and you know who your God is and His abilities, when you learn about the attributes of Him, that He's omniscient, He knows everything, He's omnipresent, He's with you, and He's omnipotent, He's all-powerful. You realize who your God is, that He knows everything, He's with you, and He's all-powerful. It gives you comfort and peace, and it builds your faith so you can trust Him in the times. He knows where you are, and He knows what's going on, and He can keep us during these times. Lord Heavenly Father, give us peace and comfort during these trying times. Help us to learn about You and learn about Your attributes, Lord. Help us to apply these truths to our life to build our faith and have confident peace in these trying times. Be with us and keep us. In Jesus' name, amen.